Professor Natalia Bektareva, an eminent neurophysiologist and researcher of consciousness, spent a decade exploring what transpires in the human mind at the threshold between life and death. Her approach isn't esoteric but grounded in science aimed at unraveling the enigmas of our existence. One of the most haunting yet poignant topics she delved into is the instant when the soul enters the grave. Death does not begin with the cessation of the heartbeat, it commences with the final impulse traversing the brain when the body falls silent. Yet, as Bektareva noted, consciousness might persist. Her studies highlighted unique cases of patients revived from clinical death who recounted sensations of vitality, observing surroundings as if from an external vantage point, hearing conversations among medical staff, and experiencing a profound absence of fear. What were these experiences? Hallucinations of a dying brain or the soul's first steps into a new reality? According to Natalia Bektareva, consciousness isn't merely a byproduct of biochemical reactions but something fundamentally deeper. She often stressed that consciousness transcends mere brain function and can exist independently. As the body is laid to rest and loved ones gather sobbing by the graveside, many who survived clinical death insist the soul remains nearby, observing and listening. At this juncture, the transition isn't into oblivion or cessation but into something beyond our current understanding. Bektareva proposed that something extraordinary unfolds in the initial moments following death. She described the brain as seemingly igniting one last time, unleashing powerful neural impulses. Perhaps it is at this moment that an individual's entire life flashes before them, revisiting every experience to assess if it was all worthwhile. Following this surge, there is a descent into silence, but not the silence of emptiness. This silence possesses a distinct quality of being. Many liken it to a gray corridor where neither light nor darkness is visible. It's a space where the soul seems to stand bare before itself. In this realm, time ceases to exist, there are no clocks or days. There's only a deep awareness of everything one has done, felt, and left unsaid. This is the first grave into which the soul descends, not a physical one, but an internal space of honest reflection where self-deception is impossible. Natalia Bektareva repeatedly emphasized that the brain is the most enigmatic organ, and its demise doesn't necessarily signify the end of consciousness. She documented cases where brain electrical activity persisted minutes after the heart stopped. What is this? Mere residual processes or evidence that we are more than just our bodies? This question remains unanswered. However, one thing is certain, upon entering the grave, you do not vanish. Something remains, something that continues to feel, observe, and perhaps even learn. And it is at this moment that the most mysterious and significant journey of a person's life begins. Stay tuned to our channel to not miss the next part of this profound narrative. Ahead are more astonishing revelations and scientific reflections by Natalia Bektareva on life, death, and the immortality of consciousness. When the soul departs from the physical body, it embarks on a journey through what Natalia Bektareva termed the Tamira zone. In this state, individuals observe themselves not from within but from an external perspective. These are not mere figments of the imagination but experiences filled with profound significance. Many patients who return from clinical death describe seeing themselves from above, lying on an operating table or in a hospital ward. They hear doctors' voices and the sobs of loved ones, yet they are unable to speak or interfere. What is this? A random activity of a dying brain, or evidence that consciousness can exist independently of the body? Bekhtereeva believed such cases cannot be disregarded. The scientific approach requires us to explore the unexplained rather than dismiss it. Perhaps within these phenomena lies the key to understanding the immortality of the soul. Following the mirror zone comes a phase tentatively termed resolution. This is the moment when the soul realizes there is no returning to its former life. Acceptance ensues, and it isn't always accompanied by fear or despair. Many describe feeling peace, lightness, and even bliss, as if discarding a heavy garment worn throughout life and experiencing true liberation. Despite her strictly scientific stance, Natalia Bekhtereeva remained receptive to these experiences. She wasn't concerned with labeling them as soul, consciousness, or substance, but with what people genuinely experienced. She believed that a person is more than their physical body, and that it is this more that begins its journey when the body returns to the earth. In this context, the grave is not merely a physical burial site, it is a symbol of transition. As you enter the grave, you cross a threshold into a new form of existence, not necessarily reincarnation into another body, as Eastern philosophies suggest, nor heaven or hell as proposed by religious systems. Perhaps it is a realm of self-awareness where the soul begins to deeply understand who it was and who it can become. At this moment, what some call life's judgment occurs. But, according to Bekhtereeva, judgment isn't an external authority or a stern God on a throne, it's an inner mirror that can no longer be obscured. The soul sees every pain it has caused, every joy it has given, and each drop of light or darkness becomes its true essence. This is why the scholar emphasized that it is crucial in life to be not only intelligent but also kind, not only rational but also sincere. In that space where consciousness goes after death, there are no more words, only the vibrations of actions, feelings, and intentions. Bekhtereeva recalled conversations with dying individuals who would say, "Now I understand everything." These words were whispered as confessions. They didn't ask for their lives to be prolonged. They wanted someone to hear their understanding, the truth they found on the threshold of departure. When you enter the grave, you don't bring wealth, status, or diplomas. You bring only your internal state, which becomes your new environment. Essentially, you become the medium in which you exist. If you carried pain, anger, and destruction within you during life, that will become your first post-mortem landscape. If you lived with an open heart, you will be surrounded by warmth. This is the moment of truth, and it begins not when the last shovel of earth is cast, but when the soul realizes, everything I did was not in vain. Or, conversely, much was missed. And perhaps in this moment, you are given a chance to reconsider, reevaluate, and choose a new path beyond life's threshold. Stay tuned. Subscribe to our channel to not miss the next part. We will continue to delve deeper into Natalia Bekhtereeva's scientific and spiritual reflections on what happens to consciousness after death. In the initial hours following death, a person, as surprising as it may sound, continues to exist. It isn't merely the memory of them lingering in the minds of loved ones, nor just a physical body lying silent in the coffin. It's a different quality of existence, one that cannot be measured by instruments but is reported by countless individuals who have traversed the boundaries of clinical death. Each of them, despite the variety in their accounts, describes similar sensations: clarity, observation, absence of pain, and, most importantly, profound awareness. Natalia Bektareva often asserted that consciousness might not be entirely explainable by biology. She didn't accept the explanation that everything ends with the last neuronal impulse. Instead, she believed that this impulse wasn't the end but the beginning of a completely new signal that travels to another reality. According to accounts, in the first hours after death, the soul may remain near the body, perhaps trying to understand what happened or not yet ready to release its earthly shell. Bektareva termed this phase disconnection, as if the dense bond between consciousness and body begins to dissolve, leaving behind the sensation of self, but no longer bounded by familiar limits. Some describe trying to communicate with loved ones, shouting, crying, but no one heard them. This helplessness, mixed with sudden clarity, reveals that you are still here, but no longer present. And then comes the first true pain, not of the body, but of the soul. The pain of missing the ability to touch, embrace, or say, "I'm sorry," or "I love you." This is the pain of reevaluation, and within it lies a peculiar sanctity because, for the first time, one truly realizes the significance of simple words and gestures that were not expressed during life. But how long does this state last? Science has yet to provide a definitive answer. However, observations gathered by Bektareva and her colleagues suggest that the first hours and even days after death are a crucial period. It's not emptiness, it's a transition. At this moment, consciousness, freed from biological constraints, begins its journey to a realm governed by different laws. Some describe it as a tunnel, others as light, still, others feel an immense field where everything breathes and pulses. But all share a common sentiment: you are no longer confined to a body, but you still exist. Bektareva was particularly intrigued by the consistency of near-death experience descriptions across different cultures, ages, and religious beliefs, suggesting a fundamental reality accessible to everyone, regardless of their life perspectives. It's as if there is a universal script for departure, where what matters is not your beliefs but your essence. When the soul enters the grave, it stands alone before the absolute truth. There are no masks or social roles, just you. This is a moment of great vulnerability but also of great power. This is where purification begins, not from sins, as it might seem, but from illusions. Everything that was untrue dissipates like smoke, and only what was genuine within you remains. Therefore, Bektareva stated, death is not a tragedy, it's an honest conversation. It's a return to oneself, an entry into a part of reality inaccessible in life, but one that might be the true life. If we view death not as an end but as a revelation of new layers of consciousness, fear dissipates, giving way to awe, reverence, and perhaps even hope. Stay tuned. Subscribe to our channel to not miss the continuation of this series. In the next parts, we will delve deeper into the experience of dying, the soul's memory, and post-material discoveries as discussed by Natalia Bektareva. When the body finally ceases to belong to the earthly world and the grave closes, it seems to us that everything has come to an end. But from Natalia Bektareva's perspective, this is when something she termed the path of internal dynamics of consciousness beyond the brain begins. This isn't a mystical statement but an attempt to describe scientifically what cannot be directly studied yet manifests in people's accounts and observational data. Increasingly, in recent decades, scientists have documented unique cases of post-mortem activity. Even after death has been officially declared, brief yet significant bursts of electrical activity continue to be recorded in the brain. These transient impulses have been the subject of in-depth analysis. While they could be dismissed as residual activity, Bekhtereeva hypothesized that perhaps in these very seconds, when everything else has already departed, the crucial transition of consciousness into another form of existence occurs. Scientifically, this raises many questions, philosophically, even more. But from a human perspective, it offers a glimpse beyond the edge and an understanding that death isn't annihilation. It is an unpacking, a revelation of deep layers of being that were obscured by the dense fabric of physiology during life. According to Bekhtereeva's theories, consciousness may be primary to the body. That is, it isn't the brain that creates consciousness, rather, consciousness uses the brain as an instrument. Therefore, when the body decays, consciousness doesn't disappear, it simply loses its receiver and begins to operate in a different environment with different transmission rules. This can be likened to radio waves. When the receiver breaks down, the wave doesn't vanish, it continues to exist. Similarly, the soul, having left the body, continues to resonate, perceive, analyze, and realize, albeit in an unfamiliar form. At this moment, the soul begins to remember its true self. A special state of clarity ensues. In it, there is no haste, no thoughts formulated in words. There is pure knowledge without the noise of the mind. Bekhtereeva noted that in such a state, a person might experience a sense of absolute truth, not as a result of logical constructs but as a direct perception of the entire picture of life with all its connections, causes, and consequences. This state cannot be replicated in a laboratory, but it is described by many with remarkable precision. It's as if a person steps out of a room where they lived their entire life and sees the whole house for the first time. Then they understand that every pain, every joy, every word had meaning. Nothing was accidental. And it is at this point that the soul embarks on a process of self-evaluation, not before someone else but before itself. Everything lived unfolds before the inner gaze. What once seemed important, career, appearance, status, fades away. Meanwhile, seemingly trivial things, like a kind glance or restrained anger, become shining anchors to which the soul clings to avoid dissolving into nothingness. Bekhtereeva didn't directly discuss heaven or hell, but her reflections hint at the possibility of a qualitative space of consciousness. That is, after death, you do not enter a place but a state that you yourself have created during life. And this is the greatest responsibility. Entering the grave isn't about closing a door, it's about beginning a reflection. You become a mirror to yourself, and everything you were now becomes everything you have. This is the essence of the posthumous path. The soul doesn't go anywhere. It remains, but in the form it has earned, pure or distorted, light or heavy. It's not a punishment, it's a consequence. Therefore, Natalia Bekhtereeva persistently raised the issue of ethical consciousness. Not just the science of the brain, but the science of the human being as a creature responsible for its inner space, because one day this space will become your eternal abode. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next parts of this series. Next up is a revelation about the soul's fate after burial, the memory of the personality, and the possibilities of consciousness transformation beyond life. The grave, at first glance, signifies the end. A stone, an inscription, a date, silence. But when viewed through the lens of Natalia Bekhtereva's scientific reflections, it becomes clear that this is merely an external symbol, a shell of a far more intricate and profound process that continues within the consciousness of the departed individual. One of the most astonishing observations collected by Bektereva relates to the phenomenon of postmortem attachment. People who return from a state of clinical death often reported being unable to leave due to unresolved emotions, pain of loved ones, unresolved conflicts, and heavy memories. These are invisible threads binding the soul to the earth. And as long as they do not dissolve, consciousness appears to remain nearby in an internal state of awaiting resolution. Bektereva viewed this as a manifestation of deep connections between the individual and their emotional background. In her opinion, consciousness after death does not become a blank slate. It carries within itself all that has been accumulated, like a vessel. This is why it is crucial for a person during their life to strive for harmony with themselves, others, and the world. One of the paradoxes highlighted by the scientist is how often the pain of the dying is not related to physical suffering but to a sense of the unspoken. As if within each of us lives a vast layer of unsaid words, and it is they that become the stone preventing the soul from leaving the earth. When the body is already in the grave, but the soul is still here, something very subtle occurs. This can be compared to an echo, a faint yet clear reverberation of life. It still sounds. It can still be felt, especially by those who were closest. Many relatives recount that in the days following the funeral, they sensed the presence of the departed, familiar scents, sensations, unusual dreams. These are not fabrications but a bridge connecting living and departed consciousness. Bektereva approached these phenomena without skepticism. She asserted that science should be attentive to the subtle manifestations of life and death, even if it currently lacks the tools for precise measurement. For it is in these boundary phenomena that the key to understanding what happens when we enter the grave may lie. It's important to understand that death is not just a personal experience but a collective one. The soul departs but continues to live in the memory of others. And if the memory lives on, the soul continues to resonate in the world. This is not merely a metaphor, it's a special form of existence. Memory, in Bektereva's view, is the energetic trace of consciousness in matter. And the stronger the love and the more sincere the relationships, the longer this trace will pulsate. When the soul enters this space where it no longer has a body but still perceives emotions and thoughts, a critical moment arrives. It's a choice. Not formulated in words but an internal direction, to let go and depart or to remain tied to pain, guilt, and grievances. Many ancient traditions speak of 40 days during which the soul wanders, observes, and lets go. Although Bektereva did not refer to religious interpretations, she was intrigued by how these concepts align with psychophysiological data. Perhaps this is indeed a period of transition, the completion of an emotional cycle. It is during this period, according to her hypothesis, that the soul finally transitions from the zone of the body's influence into the zone of freedom. But freedom always involves choice. And what the soul chooses, peace or the repetition of pain, depends on what it carries into the grave. Nothing disappears. The energy of consciousness transforms, transitions into other forms. And when you enter the grave, you don't die, you become a vibration, an echo, a source of light or shadow. This is the new reality that humanity has only begun to comprehend. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next parts. Ahead is what science is only beginning to sense: the memory of the soul, spatial transitions, and possible connections between worlds. What happens to the soul after it finally releases the earthly body, recognizes its independence from matter, and passes through the space of memory and re-evaluation? Natalia Bektareva referred to this stage with the provisional term, consciousness reformatting point. It's not fantasy but an attempt to use scientific language to describe the moment when the personality transitions into a qualitatively new state. Bektareva repeatedly emphasized that consciousness is capable of adapting even outside the body and in conditions that modern science has yet to measure. Herein lies the uniqueness of human essence, the ability to change even in death. After the physical carrier of consciousness disintegrates, it apparently doesn't disappear immediately. It continues to structure itself, tuning into new forms of perception. Many who returned from clinical death felt as if they passed through a layer of transition where time and space held no significance, yet there was structure, order, and a logic of being different from Earth's but not chaotic. It is here that what ancients called the world of souls might begin, not in a religious sense but as a subtle reality filled with entities, experiences, and intentions. Bektareva considered such descriptions essential for study because they were recurrent. People unfamiliar with each other, from different countries and cultures, described similar scenes. This couldn't be mere coincidence. In this new reality, the soul seemingly engages in dialogue with other entities. Sometimes these are those who departed earlier, sometimes they are guides. These descriptions often mention a sense of understanding, warmth, and acceptance, as if everything that seemed terrifying in life becomes neutral here. There is no punishment, only consequences. And they aren't pronounced by someone else but are recognized by the soul itself. When you enter the grave, you enter the space of truth. There, it's impossible to hide behind familiar words or masks. Everything you were becomes what you are. And this is perceived not as a threat but as liberation. Perhaps for this reason, some souls hesitate to let go of the earthly realm. They are drawn back to the body, loved ones, and unfinished business. These are souls burdened with much unfinished work. And this is why it is important in life to complete conversations, relationships, and intentions so that at the moment of transition, you don't carry that heaviness with you. An intriguing phenomenon that Bektareva also discussed was the memory of the soul. Many who experienced clinical death recounted memories not only from their own lives but also seemingly from others. These are memories unattached to their biography but carrying emotional imprints, as if the soul had touched another experience, another time. This suggests that consciousness after death can expand. It can transcend the individual self and touch the collective field about which philosophers and mystics have written. In such reality, the soul no longer perceives itself as a body, it is thought, feeling, and energy. Depending on its vibration and what it brought with it, the soul is drawn to a corresponding layer. This is a kind of post-mortem navigation, not by road, but by state. When you enter the grave, you don't lose yourself, you strip bare. If you were light, you enter into light. If you were pain, you pass through pain, not as punishment but as an opportunity to understand what you created within yourself. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next part. In it, we will reveal how consciousness can continue its path in other dimensions and how Natalia Bektareva explained the possibility of postmortem personal growth even beyond the physical world. If death is not the end but a transition, then inevitably the question arises, where does this path lead? Natalia Bektareva, despite her strict scientific mindset, did not reject the possibility of postmortem dynamics of consciousness. On the contrary, she asserted that thinking and sensations can continue in conditions different from the material world, and that personality after death does not disappear without a trace. But what form does this continuation take? Perhaps it doesn't have the familiar contours anymore. There is no longer a body, speech, or eyes. But the essence remains. A center of perception, an energetic structure. Bektareva called this the aware point, something that perceives, analyzes, and feels, but now without the support of physical organs. In this state, a new phase of growth after death is possible. This might sound paradoxical, but it is precisely what some who experienced clinical death reported. They felt like students to whom profound truths were revealed, not through lessons but through absolute understanding. Bektareva was curious: can consciousness, without a brain, continue to learn? If so, it means that life after death not only exists but has meaning, not as a wait for something, but as an active process of transformation. In this context, death is not the opposite of life. It is its continuation in another form. According to observations, after passing through transitional layers, the soul likely enters a phase where there is no longer a connection to earthly emotions. This is not emptiness but peace. There is no anger, anxiety, or fear there. There is deep acceptance and expanded perception. Perhaps this state is what religions call paradise, and what science might term metaconsciousness. What is especially important in this state, as Bektareva believed, is that the soul retains memory, but not as a set of images. It is memory as a feeling, as energy. The soul doesn't recall facts, it remembers the vibration. For example, not a specific conversation but the emotion associated with it. Not an event but the internal quality of how it was lived. This becomes the basis for the further path. It is precisely in this state that the soul can either remain, dissolving into peace, or return, not in the physical sense, but as part of another process, inspiration, intuition, or inner response in the living. Bektareva emphasized that many discoveries in science, art, and philosophy could be the result of an invisible transfer, where departed consciousness, possessing higher knowledge, returns to our world as a stream of thought. Perhaps this is how geniuses feel inspiration, as a connection with something beyond time. This is why death is not just a personal process, it is an act involving all of humanity. Every soul that leaves the world leaves an imprint behind. And the deeper, purer, and wiser it was, the stronger its posthumous influence. When you enter the grave, you do not disappear. You become part of a great network of consciousnesses. You are not an end, you are an echo that can become a voice, light, knowledge. Bekhtereeva believed that sooner or later, science will come to understand these processes, and then death will cease to be a frightening boundary. It will become a transition, a threshold, a path home. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the next part, where we will explore the question, can the soul return? What do science, intuition, and the experiences of those who have peered beyond life's edge say? Once, reflecting on the nature of life, Natalia Bekhtereeva uttered a phrase that became iconic: human consciousness is the only thing capable of transcending the boundaries of death. In this statement, there is no religious dogma, only openness to the unknown, to what is currently beyond the reach of instruments but accessible through observation, experience, and intuitive knowledge. Among all the mysteries associated with death, one of the oldest and most debated is the possibility of return, reincarnation, rebirth. These words often resonate in esoteric and religious contexts. But how did science, and Bekhtereeva in particular, view this? First and foremost, she emphasized that science cannot dismiss what it has yet to explain. If people from around the world, regardless of culture, age, or belief, describe memories from past lives, this isn't a cause for ridicule but for study. She was particularly intrigued by cases where children, without any prompting, described details of lives they couldn't possibly know. Addresses, names, events. These cases were documented by researchers in India, Turkey, the United States, and notably, were often verifiable. What is this? Fantasy, coincidence, or evidence that consciousness can indeed transition into a new body, retaining part of its memory? Bekhtereeva believed that if consciousness doesn't die with the brain, it must continue somewhere. And if it persists as active energy, it might be capable of reconnecting with another body, another brain. This may not be a mechanical process but a higher-order regularity akin to what quantum physics is beginning to glimpse. If we accept that the soul can return, an important question arises: for what purpose? The answer doesn't lie in morality but in development. A soul that hasn't completed its lesson might return to finish it. A soul laden with pain might seek a path to purification. Conversely, a soul filled with light might be called upon to aid others, though memories of the past are usually erased. It's akin to waking from a dream: only a feeling, sometimes an image, rarely a narrative remains. Similarly, in a new life, the soul may not recall specific events but carries within it a disposition, fear, propensity, talent, something without rational explanation. Bekhtereeva didn't provide definitive answers. She didn't claim that reincarnation is a proven fact, but she left room for the question. And in science, a question is already halfway to the truth. When you enter the grave, you don't disappear. You may rest. You may dissolve into light, or you may return, not by force, but by an inner law of development. For the soul is not merely a passenger, it's a traveler. And if the journey isn't complete, it will continue in a new body, in a new time, with a new name, but with the same spark within. Therefore, death is not the end, it is a pause, a deep breath, a chance to view everything from a height, and then, perhaps, be born again with a new understanding, a new mission, and a new light. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the final concluding part of this profound series. In it, we will summarize and explore one more crucial question: how can the living prepare for the moment of entering the grave so that it becomes a beginning, not an end? As we approach the conclusion of our exploration into what happens when you enter the grave, it is essential to recall the key insights from Natalia Bektareva, a scientist who dared to confront the mystery of death and consciousness. Death is not a point but a process. It is a transition filled with awareness, reflection, and liberation. It is an entry into a new form of existence where the familiar boundaries of the physical world no longer apply. Bektareva emphasized that consciousness is not merely a product of neurons but something more fundamental. This is why it can continue to exist after the body's decay, experience a new reality, and even evolve there. Our experience and observations reveal that the first hours and days after death are a unique period of interaction between the soul and the world of the living. This is a time of delicate connection when it is crucial not only to leave the body but also to convey love, forgiveness, and understanding. Next comes the stage of internal self-analysis for the soul, where all illusions disappear. There remains only the true self, pure from masks and conventions. And it is this self that becomes the foundation for the further journey, whether through dissolution in light, return to a new life, or abiding in the space of transformation. An important lesson Bektareva left us is that life must be lived consciously and fully so that at the moment of entering the grave, the soul does not bear the weight of unfinished business. And finally, science, spirituality, and humanity intersect precisely at this boundary between life and death, where the real journey begins. When you enter the grave, remember that it is not an end but a door to a new reality. And what this path will be depends on who you were and who you aspire to become. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found it interesting and valuable to learn more deeply about the mystery of death and consciousness, please subscribe to our channel to not miss new videos. Share this knowledge with loved ones. It can change the perspective on life and death. Until we meet again.